So today we're going to go through the Kerr Wood Leidal's Rapid Hydro Assessment Model and how it has been used and can be used to quickly find hydroelectric potential in large areas of land. Let me just what's going on here? Okay, what we're going to cover today is a little bit of background about Kerr Wood Leidal.
Oh, and we need to come up with it. I forgot, we need to come up with it.
Sorry, just a reminder for everyone to mute themselves if you join the call. That'd be great. Thank you.
So a bit of background on Kerr Wood Leidal, a bit of background on the Rapid Hydro Assessment Model, some example applications of the RHAM model, the costing and site selection process, and a little bit on our partnership with Queen's University to further develop the model and apply it in the Albany Basin. That's what we're going to cover today. And I really encourage you, if you have a question that's relevant to what we're covering at the time, I love to have an interactive conversation while we go through this. I think we have a manageable number of people on the call. So if you have questions as we go, raise your hand or put it in the chat, and Jan will call on you to ask your question and I'll try to answer it. So a bit of background on the Rapid Hydro Assessment Model. We developed it at Kerr Wood Leidal in 2007, and we first applied it for BC, for British Columbia, for BC Hydro. And so the RHAM analysis is part of BC Hydro's integrated resource plan, their long-term plan to meet the energy needs of British Columbians. And it's been part in their plan since we did this first study for them back in 2007. We've done a bunch of updates to that as RHAM has been improved, and when we first ran it, it was for run-of-river hydro opportunities, and we've since added a storage module, and we've added modules that allow for clustering of projects and so on. So there's been a bunch of improvements since 2007, and obviously I can remember back when we were running it. If we had bought the digital elevation model of the province that we now can get for free, I remember looking at that, and it was going to be $1 million to buy the mapping for the province of BC. So there's been a lot of change in terms of computational speed and availability of data, and so we're now able to get access to better information, and computers run much faster, so we can run larger areas much faster. The tool determines the potential hydroelectric projects quickly over large areas. It basically steps down each stream in 30 to 90 meter increments, depending on the tile size of the digital elevation model. It aggregates the flow at each location, and then it looks downstream, usually in 500 meter increments, which was a water conduit length conceptually, or penstock length, and it looks at the elevation difference. And I'll tell you a bit more about how it does those computations in a moment. This can be applied anywhere in the world where the data is available. So in the developed parts of the world, there's usually data readily available, and in the developing parts of the world, it can be more of a challenge to get hydrologic analysis that is reliable. So it calculates the in-stream power, as I was describing. It then does an optimization to find the best location, and that first looks at maximizing the amount of power per penstock length. Another way to look at that, it's not necessarily penstock length. It could be looked at as dam height to develop the head that's available at the location. So it could be used for conventional hydro or run a river type hydro with a smaller intake and penstock. There's a costing module built into the tool that does cost estimates for intake, penstock, powerhouse, generator, turbine, all of the electrical gear, and then also the roads and power line connections that would be required. And then it does an economic analysis and produces a dollars per megawatt hour cost output so that projects can be ranked, and so the relative economics of projects can be evaluated against alternatives. Right now, Ryan and I and others at our firm are doing a study for Natural Resources Canada, looking at some remote communities and some remote mines, and looking at hydropower to get those communities and remote mines off diesel fuel. And so obviously the economics are very different when you're displacing diesel than if you're connecting to the Ontario grid to sell power into the grid. And it can do both of those applications. So this, the calculations are pretty simple. It's the weight of the fluid, the flow, which we get from usually the hydrologic model where the flow is aggregated to the intake location, and the elevation difference, the head, and then the efficiency of the facility. So it's a fairly simple analysis, really. It's just getting that information and doing it over large areas is the trick. As I mentioned, the costs we have, we do the intake or dam costs based on mainly driven by the flow. Penstock water conduit, again, is we estimate the penstock diameter or water conduit diameter that is required for the flow. And we do have an option built in that allows multiple water conduits if you get over the sort of maximum practical size for penstocks, costing of the powerhouse and the turbine and generating equipment, and the roads and power lines. So the roads and power lines, we have a tool built into RHAM and into the tool that we're developing called the Rapid Electrification Model, where we optimize the routing of the roads and power lines to minimize the cost based on terrain and river crossings and those sorts of things to integrate the facility either with the existing grid or to a remote community or mine that it's to serve. Maybe I'll just see if there's any questions at this point. Jan, has anyone put their hand up or put anything in the chat?
I don't see anything at this time, but if you do have a question, please feel free to ask anytime.
Okay, I'll keep going. Yeah. So also built into RHAM is an ability to cluster projects, to share roads, power lines, and substations. And this is an example from a project we did in Mexico for the World Bank and the Mexican Secretary of Energy. And CFE was the big power utility in Mexico was also involved in this study. And I got to go to Mexico and fly around in a helicopter in this area. And if folks are familiar with what's happening in Mexico right now, this is the area where the drug cartels are particularly active. So it was kind of an interesting area to go to. You can see that what's going on here is or I'll explain it here. What we're doing here with the white lines is we're connecting power plants with the transmission system in a clustered type way. The green triangles are intake locations, and the black are powerhouse locations. So this is the, the intake for this plant, and there's the powerhouse there. So we're running a power line down here to connect these projects. And a similar is done on the roads to connect the projects. We've got a bit of a color coding in here where the red are bigger projects, the amber are medium size, and the green are smaller projects. And there's a lot of potential opportunity when you aggregate projects and allow them to share power lines, roads, access roads, and substations to reduce the cost of the cluster development. So we've applied RHAM, as I mentioned, first in British Columbia, then in Yukon and Northwest Territories. We've recently done a study of all of Canada. I just mentioned the work that we've done in Mexico, and it's been applied in several countries in Southeast Asia, particularly on Borneo, Indonesia, Philippines. So I got to go there too. It's kind of cool. So this is this shows the high level results for Canada, and the color coding here is the darker the color, the greater the hydro potential in terms of megawatts. And when we zoom in, in a moment, you'll be able to see more specifically what the possibilities are. One thing I will mention here is that this analysis is raw. It's not screened out for streams that you wouldn't be able to develop hydroelectric projects on because of environmental reasons or parks or things like that. So, for example, the big red line here, that's the Fraser River, which is a very important salmon stream, and there's a moratorium on the development of hydropower on that river. And so one of the things that we do when we work with clients on this type of work is we do the raw analysis, and then we do, okay, what screens do you want to put on that? For example, in parks in British Columbia, hydropower is not allowed unless it's to serve the small towns that are within the park. So that would be a filter we would typically put on. Similarly, the tool will identify opportunities that are on glaciers, and we'll typically screen out glaciers as well. So, and then Department of National Defense bases, and there's all sorts of areas that it's really not practical to for private developers to develop hydro projects on. So now we're looking at zoomed in on Ontario. Again, the redder colors are greater hydroelectric potential, the green being the lesser, and we've basically got a cutoff. So I think we're cutting off at something like 1 megawatt and not showing the data on projects that are smaller than that. And so what this means is that it lets you focus on what are the interesting opportunities on the Ottawa River here, or the Moose River, or the Albany. I think this is the Albany here. Yeah, it would be the Albany here. So I'll flip to the next slide now. So this sort of talks in a little more detail about how we do the optimization when we look at a more detailed opportunity. So we're using the color scheme consistently, where the darkest green is 1 megawatt to say 5 megawatts, and the red is the you know, the most interesting location. I'm familiar with this location. This is Mount Meager, isn't it, Ryan? In the Lillooet area?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the this will be the best hydro potential in the area, and I think this is actually the site where Interjex has developed a hydroelectric project on the Upper Lillooet River. And so, you know, when we get results like this, then we look in more detail at you know, what's the best location for intake here, what's the best location for the powerhouse, and in the work we're doing for Natural Resources Canada at this point, we're confirming the RHAM results using tools like Google Earth to, you know, to find you know, something that visually is a good location for an intake and good location for a powerhouse. And so in this example, we're choosing to put the intake there and the powerhouse here, and then based on the flow estimates, we'll size the plant, and then we typically will well, sometimes we automate this, sometimes we do it manually. We look at stream gauges nearby to look at the shape of the flow over the year, and so that we're able to estimate how much energy would be generated in each month. Most streams in Canada have a lot of variation of flow over the year. And for example, this Lillooet River would have a large freshet in the, you know, sort of April, May, June, July period, and then much lower flows at other times of the year. And so then you're into optimizing the size of the plant if it doesn't have storage to you know, how much energy you generate during the high flow period versus the low flow period. We've already mentioned that the roads and power lines are estimated based on our rapid electrification model. So in this case, you know, there are Forest Service roads that run up this area, so it would be short roads into the powerhouse and penstock route and intake. And then for this particular example, this plant is large enough that I think it was connected at 230,000 volts to a substation south of Pemberton, which would be you know, further. Just get it on screen here. That would be down to the south and the east of what's shown on the map here. So the tool does the automatic routing of those roads and power lines. As I mentioned, there's analysis built into the tool to optimize the best size of the plant. And depending on the area that you know, you're looking at, if you're selling to, you know, a power utility, for example, they may have various things in their contracts to encourage delivery of power at certain times of year, for example. So we can put that into the tool and optimize the size of the plant and when, you know, how much energy has been being delivered at what time. In the case of this work we're doing for Natural Resources Canada, you know, we're looking at the loads of these small communities and mines over the year and sizing the plants so that if there's enough power potential at the location near the community, sizing it so that it can meet the peak electricity demand in the winter, so that there's the opportunity to completely displace the diesel generation. Probably leave the diesel plants there for backup, but try and minimize the amount of diesel use. The other thing that happens in these remote communities when they switch to hydropower, they often switch the heating to electric. Sometimes air source heat pumps if the if the climate will allow it, and that results in an increase in electricity use. So typically build that into the forecast demand, peak demand, and monthly energy use, so that the community can get off the propane, heating oil, or other methods that they may be using for heating the space and heating hot water, which is really allows a decarbonization of these communities where those opportunities exist. And there's a number of communities in Canada that are part of that study. And I don't think I'm allowed to talk about the specifics yet, but hopefully Natural Resources Canada will release that report sometime soon. After we've found the best, size of plant, best location, then the capital cost, the operating costs, energy output is estimated, and we end up with a dollars per megawatt hour cost to determine the ranking of the projects and the financial viability. And the capital and operating costs are based on our experience with a number of projects that have been developed, and we've then brought that to 2023 dollars. So it's a current estimate of the capital cost. And then once this GIS tool has been used to find the location and so on, there's then no substitute for going to site and verifying the information is valid. What's the best place for an intake considering geotechnical conditions and so on? Is it practical to build a penstock or water conduit or tunnel or canal on the routing that was identified? In very mountainous parts of the world, that can be really, really challenging to find a route for penstock or water conduit construction. And then, what's a sensible place for a powerhouse? And this might seem ironic, but I've seen powerhouses built below the flood construction level, and that just seems like a really bad idea. Like, let's make sure that we build a powerhouse in a place where it's not going to get flooded out by streams. So I think Charlene Monaco is on the call, and this is the basin that Charlene is working with Kerr Wood Leidal on. This is an NSERC industrial partnership with Queen's University. Charlene is doing her PhD at Queen's and looking at the Rapid Hydro Assessment Model for opportunities in the Albany Basin to get some of the remote communities off diesel. And some of the things that Charlene is evaluating in her thesis is, what's the impact of climate change on the hydropower potential? Is this, I know in British Columbia, the thoughts are that it's warmer, wetter winters, longer, drier summers. You'll get a chance to hear Charlene's thoughts on this at the conference in Niagara-on-the-Lake in May, where Charlene and I will be presenting the work to date on the work in the Albany Basin. One of the interesting things that we've had to deal with is that there are at least 3 large diversions from the Albany Basin, and they're shown here and highlighted. So there are diversions that are going into the St. Lawrence, and this one actually goes to Manitoba. And so we've had to discount the flows in the Albany by the amount of water diverted to these other basins. So when you start to dig into this type of work, you get into some interesting things like that. When we first did the study in BC, for example, we found all of this hydro potential around the on the Columbia River between Revelstoke and Mica, and we realized that the digital elevation model was pre-1983 when the impoundment of the reservoir for the Revelstoke Dam started. And so one of the things in our quality assurance, quality control process is making sure that the results are reliable considering the vintage of the data. When I first looked at the results, I'm like, what's going on here? Like, why are we finding this potential in this location where the development has already been done? So that's another thing that we screen out for is the development potential that's already been developed, because if you're helping people find sites, finding a site that's already been developed is usually not too exciting for a developer that is trying to find new locations. I think I've already mentioned most of this. So I think we're Charlene and I are presenting on the Wednesday at the Power Water Canada conference in May. So if you haven't already registered for that, I encourage you to do that. I'm sure Jan and Ontario Water Power Association would like you all to attend. And so now we have some time for discussion. And just before we go there, Ryan Taylor, do you want to add anything on the geographic information side of things? I guess one thing I'll just say is it's really important to have the right team members involved in this kind of study. I'm a sort of hydropower construction type person. We usually have hydrologists involved in the work and geographic information system people to really bring all the pieces together. Ryan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ron. You covered a lot of my talking points already, which is fantastic. So, yeah, I'll just comment from kind of the GIS data side of it. So, when we originally ran this in 2007 for the province of British Columbia, one penstock length took 36 hours to run. So that was 36 hours times 10. So that's a lot of push the button, go home and come back and hope it didn't crash type scenarios. We found just over 1 million analysis points in BC at that time. 10 million analysis points in BC, of which after the costing and the economic analysis, we pared it down to roughly 8,200 economically feasible locations. Obviously, those aren't all going to be built, but it was an inventory that we were able to deliver to BC Hydro, so they would have a list of sites that were ranked by dollars per megawatt hour and size that they could start looking at in more depth for their long-term planning. Fast forward to last calendar year, which was roughly 14 and a half years ago. 14 and a half years from the first run to the last run. The study you're looking at right now is again the Canadian-wide study. So we were able to run this entire data set, which is 225 million points. We were able to run this in 12 hours for the entire data set. So it just goes to show you that computers are getting wildly faster and more economic at their processing power. So to do a province of a run is in the hours type range. It's all the prep work and the data that is the important that we're getting fed into the model. So
yeah, thanks Ryan, that's great. Yeah, so the computational power is just really changed there. Ryan referenced the penstock links. We've typically done most of these studies with penstocks or water conduits ranging in length from 500 meters to 5,000 meters in 500-meter increments. And we found that usually gets us in the ballpark of the evaluation area. And now on that study that we're doing for Natural Resources Canada, when we get into the more detail, we're ending up In some cases, I know in one of the projects I looked at yesterday where, we got the penstock length down to 300 meters. And obviously, if you can develop the head in a shorter penstock, that's going to be a more economic project, everything else being equal. One other thing I'll just mention is that, the water doesn't respect these provincial boundaries or these government type boundaries. So the analysis is really done by river basin. And then we have some interesting challenges to deal with. For example, in the, I'll just pick on this area here where there's flow. It's kind of interesting. The Kootenay River actually flows south into the U.S. and then back up into Canada. And so, to do the analysis properly, you really have to allow for, you need to look beyond the boundary of Canada to include the flow that's coming into Canada from the U.S. in this area. And there's similar challenges on this border between Yukon and Alaska. Interestingly, that problem doesn't come up much in Ontario because of the international boundary being the St. Lawrence, so and the Great Lakes in most cases. But up here, it's complicated, and I mentioned those interbasin diversions. Can be a big complication to studies, and really end up causing kind of error that you don't want to make if you don't factor those in.
Yeah. Ron, there's a question in the chat. Ivor had a question or a comment about Hatch did a study in Northern Ontario, similar to what we've done. Ivor, yeah, we're aware of that study for sure. We've looked at it. Our traditional model is a traditional run of river hydro plant with no storage. Their study focused a lot on storage, so it's definitely in our plan to kind of cross-reference our data set with their data set to kind of see how they line up and how they're similar and how they're different. The storage part of it is on the order of 15 to 20 times more computation processing power you need than to do the traditional run of river. So we weren't asked to do that for the NRCan Canadian-wide study, but for smaller basins and smaller areas, it's definitely a possibility for us. We have the tool. This was just not the scope of our original project, but yes, great point. It is in our plan to look into the comparison between the two and kind of how our results line up with what they got. Keeping in mind that their study focused on storage with dam heights and all that stuff, where ours is traditional run of rivers. So yeah, happy to expand on that if you want to chat, but that's kind of where we're at right now with that one. So
Great, thanks, Ryan and Ron. If anyone does have any more questions, you can feel free to raise your hand and ask directly or type it in the chat. But that was a great presentation. Great to see the potential of tools like the assessment model and unlocking hydropower potential. So it's great. Don't see any hands or any questions in the chat. So I guess we can conclude unless something does come up. A reminder that we do have the survey link in the chat box. So if you want to click that and fill out the survey, we would really appreciate it. Thanks again to Ron and Ryan for taking the time to present and teach us about the Rapid Hydro Assessment Model. We look forward to learning more at the conference.